Welcome to another episode of the Cornerstone of America podcast. I am your co-host. I gotta say that, man. Alex Jowdy. I am joined by
David Body.
Welcome, man. So you're a vet now. This is like number 3, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I've got it all figured out.
I'm the one who's gonna get my shit together. You're like 2:30. Cool. Like hour later, we're recording. Oh no, half hour. Not bad. So how was, like, I wanted to check in. How's you went on a brief training deployment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So how'd that go?
Good. Yeah. Went down to Fort Harrison for some medical training.
Yep.
And of course it's combat related. So I usually go into these things thinking like, this is going to be super awesome to use in regular life. Well, I mean, if somebody gets shot or blown up, I'm good.
That's good.
I've got them covered. But a lot of the little stuff we're not really covering, but it's good. Honestly, every time I do medical training with the military, I walk away thinking, okay, I need a better setup in my rigs, in my ADC bag, things like that. I'm like, man, I really should have this or that. So, and honestly,
that's a good reminder.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm always like, do we have Band-Aids?
Yeah. I mean,
basic shit, right?
Well, the simple thing of tourniquets, like, in the past, everybody was really worried about tourniquets. Oh, you're going to lose limbs. And then, of course, we learned, like, no, that's the first thing you're going to do. And the reality is most severe injuries are going to involve, major hemorrhaging. Hey, best thing you can do is throw a tourniquet on there high and tight.
Right.
And then, later on, you can figure out what else to do. And so a lot of tourniquets, I think that's one of the big things.
Mm-hmm.
And then, if you've never had an NPA shoved in your nose,
oh,
you haven't lived.
How did that go?
Oh, it sucks. I hate it every time. Nosebleed, all that good stuff.
Dude. But that's got to be pretty, I mean, obviously it's important for what you guys do, but also it does have real life application. One of the guys that I know I've had on the podcast a couple of times, Bruce Trout, he's based out of Ohio, I want to say. And the reason why I know him was because he was training under one of the coaches that Anna Marie knows, was starting strength.
Mm-hmm.
And dude was like, his wife's 9.5 months pregnant, right? Like due any day. And he was going to work, pulling off like the shoulder, just coming off this like, off ramp, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And a truck in front of him flipped over.
Oh,
right?
geez.
Yeah. So he pulls over, gets out, goes to help the guy.
Mm-hmm.
And as he's going over, he gets clipped by a car behind him, right?
Oh.
And he gets thrown through the back of the windshield, right? Severs like the femoral artery, right? Or nicked it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And luckily, one of the ladies that stopped behind him was a nurse. She comes over, boom, hits a tourniquet on his leg, right?
Yep.
Fast, and stops the bleeding.
Yep.
He still ended up losing the leg, but saved his life, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And he was in a coma for a few days, medical induced coma and the whole thing. And dude's a freaking stud, man. Not to go like way off topic, but he's got back in strength training. Now he's training like he's a single leg amputee below knee.
Mm-hmm. It's awesome.
He's in the pipeline. He's going through the accreditation process to become a strength coach.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Very cool guy, man. I've had him on a couple times. He's awesome.
But that makes a good point. Like a simple tourniquet.
Yeah.
That's $15 to $20 depending on where you're buying it. And you could literally just stash them all over the place. And that's the difference between losing a limb or dying within minutes. And that's one of the things that's crazy about this class is you watch little videos of people, for whatever reason, they get hurt, shot, stabbed, something. And you literally can watch. And when you're watching the timer to see how quickly these people are out and then basically dead. And it's just mind boggling. Obviously, like throat, you can't put a tourniquet on a neck, but as far as extremities, I mean, that's it. Carry one. So I have a lot of them, but I'm going to get more.
Yeah. Yeah. I need to get a couple at least and do some training on some of that as well. It's especially with kids, you know what I mean? You have kids and, you always like fear for the worst. But if you go down, I got a buddy who's in insurance and they're like rabid with statistics. And as far as they know everything as far as like car accidents, you have a risk of dying from this and that, whatever, because insurance companies and whatnot. And he was rattling off some insane numbers of like percentage of surviving a car accident. And then if you have this type of vehicle, if you have a tourniquet, if you understand like super basic, like Cub Scouts first aid, right? Yeah. Like they have all these levels that they sit there and it's like life or death, loss of limb, like all these different things and scenarios. It's really interesting when you talk to somebody who actually does this for a living in breaking down the statistical like scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, all I know is a base level.
Yeah.
And yet that base level alone really steps up the game.
Right.
And so it's good. It's part of being prepared.
Cool.
There's a lot of layers to it. So
that's awesome, man.
So it was good.
So you're gone for like 5 days. Yeah.
Yeah. 5 days. And then, roll back into town, head drill following that. So just army life for a week. Yep. Good to be back, man. Get some snow.
Nice. So last time we were talking about the various organizations you're part of, both Operation Restored Warrior and the Iron Council. And so I thought it'd be good to follow up. We were talking the other day about, because you're in this transitional period in your life right now, about, starting your own business.
Yep.
Right. Taking kind of control of your own revenue, multiple revenue streams. And then I thought about how this came up a lot during COVID.
Yeah.
Right. So many people basically just like, I lost my job. And then a lot of people pretty much just tanked. Right. And to an extent, I'm careful to say this, because I've thought about this more recently, especially earlier on. Like when it first happened, it's a shock, and you don't expect, especially if you're a waiter, if you're working at a restaurant, a bar, you're going to school, like all these different things, and these things are like totally out of your control, right? But then it was, okay, now what, right? Especially when you saw after a couple of weeks, this wasn't going to be a 2 weeks to slow the spread thing, and I don't want to make this episode about COVID. It was more about like what your response was after, right?
Yes.
So we put the question out there. To anybody, did you start a business or like a side hustle like after the pandemic hit, right? And got some pretty good responses. So I thought we kind of go through those today, and then talk about our own experiences and kind of go from there. So, so one of the responses I got was from one of actually my wife's fellow coaches. So he said he was a teacher. Yeah. So, and he was already a strength athlete, right? So he transitioned over to coaching, and now it's a full-time career. He does basically what Anna Marie does. He's an online strength coach, online. Online. And he moved to Boston, and he's actually working out at one of the new strength gyms out there as well.
Wow.
Yeah. So, so that was pretty interesting. The other one was a buddy of mine in California. So he said he started a side hustle. So he works in a machine shop, right? So for them, they were considered, to an extent, some of the stuff what they did was essential, especially in California, because California was one of the more stricter lockdown states.
Right.
But he looked at it as like, well, I have access to all this machinery. I'll talk to his boss. So he basically started a side hustle manufacturing different parts for, like basically you name it, like outdoors, like little things, because they can do everything like at the machine shop. He was making like clips for harnesses and then 3D printing. So, and because certain businesses shut down, some of their accounts froze up. So we had this free time. So we started tinkering with ideas for like, scope mounting brackets for guns and things like that too. Yeah. So now it's a whole side business for him.
Wow. Yeah. It's incredible because people who are successful, they look for the gap and they jump in there. And if you think about what was one of the big issues with COVID, supply chain.
Yep.
And so if you can suddenly stand in and fill that gap and say, hey, this company I know is missing these pieces, boom. Here you go. You start making those things, and now you've literally made a full-time job out of filling that gap. I mean, it's crazy. You just got an opportunity. I feel like opportunity is such a big part of it. Yeah. You got to be able to find that opportunity and just jump on it, regardless of, usually if you're jumping out and doing that, there's a lot of fear. There's all kinds of things that could go wrong, but like fortune favors the brave.
It's true. So one of the guys responded, he's actually... It's kind of funny. Like there's a lot of people that are in this area that at least responded. He is a strength coach, but he started a separate federal firearms license with a special occupational tax. So
wow,
yeah. So I thought you get a kick out of this, right? So
wow.
So like basically getting that license, so he can start facilitating work as So what he said was helping family get like NFA items and getting them quickly because he can help process that like efficiently, right, as well. So
wow,
that was interesting. And and then didn't realize that me and him started chatting back and forth. He had this extensive work in like firearms and security as well too. And then I started talking to him about my background. He goes, dude, I had no freaking idea you were doing that as well. So it's interesting. What about some of the ones that you know about, like maybe friends or family?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because some of the people I know just took what they were already doing and made it online. I think that was the first thing I noticed. Counselors, pastors, people like that, where it's like, we have had this traditional way of doing things. And then all of a sudden it's like, everybody knows Zoom now.
Yeah.
Everybody's comfortable and used to it. And so suddenly it's like, hey, I can live wherever I want.
Mm-hmm.
Think about us moving here.
Right.
Hey, I can go finally move to Montana or Arizona or some of these places that some of these people I know are moving to, because they're able to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to transition this fully online.
Right.
And that was one of those times where everybody was doing everything online. It wasn't weird. And now it's like, man, I can't even imagine going back into the office.
Yeah.
But the other thing I've seen is a lot of, I would say like consulting / life coaching type stuff where people are kind of sitting there floundering at home. And so, hey, I'm going to start offering these kinds of resources, again, virtually, where people were just kind of plugging along in their job and they don't know what to do with themselves. And so now here's this easy, hey, I can just, pay this guy X amount of money, get on a Zoom call with them, and then they can kind of help coach me through. Because I think that's one of the biggest things is a lot of people just froze.
Yeah.
A lot of people just froze. Or like, I don't even know what to do. And so there's a huge gap there now for people to provide consulting, provide coaching, things like that. I'm trying to think of some of the other, an Iron Council.
Yeah.
You see guys doing all kinds of stuff, making all kinds of moves. And usually what it was I feel like one of the biggest things that happened was, so I was working for 2 government agencies, essentially.
Right.
Well, when the government starts getting weird, suddenly you realize I'm in a bad position, because as things get weirder, I am not very sovereign. I am literally relying on the thing that is doing this right now, up and down, up and down.
Yeah.
I'm relying on them. I don't want to be in that position. And so the question of how do I become more sovereign? How do I put myself in a position where I am not relying on something that's totally up and down constantly? And so out of that, I think there's a lot of guys who have said, hey, you know what? This thing I've been thinking about, wondering about for years, could I do this? They're just like, you know what? Now's the time. Green light, go. Yeah. And so they just stepped out and started doing it. And then in the wake of, whether they lost their job or not, they stepped into this other thing, and we're able to kind of roll with that. And I think some of us need a little bit of a kick in the ass to actually step out and do it. And so COVID was that for a lot of guys, like, ooh, I can't sit there. And for me personally, that was a big deal for me, was like, how can I become more sovereign? Well, for one, don't be relying on the government for both of my paychecks.
Right. And especially when it swings so much between who's in power, right? Which political party, and one political party will favor a certain style, and one will favor another style, right? And that's so. That's what was interesting to me about that whole situation was how many people folded up. And versus how many people saw it as opportunity.
Yes.
Right. And I think there's a fair amount of people that did see it as opportunity, because one of the things we talked about was the workforce issue right now, right? Like the labor shortage, right? And it's not just a specific state, like across the board.
Yep.
Right. But what they're talking about for the most part is what you would consider like a blue collar job, right? Whether it's being a waiter, working in certain services, generally anything that's like under, that requires like a 8 to 10 hour shift, like shift work, things like that too, right? Non-union, so you don't have like the kick of like these benefits and whatnot. And and I think what happened was a lot of people took the time that COVID provided, which was everybody stay home. And then you had a couple stimulus packages, you had expanded unemployment, and it wasn't something where, because there's still people right now complaining about like, oh, well, that's what happens when we give money, we're just sitting at home. Nobody's sitting at home right now living off the money from like the pandemic, expansion, right? The stimulus packages.
Right.
No, it helped at that time, but we're going on like your end of year 2 now, right? So and that money stopped like a little while ago, right? And even before that, like the unemployment benefits were cut in half. I think what happened is, and there's some good studies that are out about that now, is more people took the opportunity of like, okay, I got a little bit of money here from the government, and let's be honest, like the government money is technically your money.
We'll see how this next tax return looks.
Depends on who your accountant is.
But
they took the ability of like, okay, I've got unemployment, I've got like a raise in unemployment of what it normally would be. So let's say somebody who normally gets $300 a week, maybe now they're getting $700 a week, and you're not getting rich, but if you're smart, like you can pay your bills off that. And I think people took advantage. It's like, okay, maybe all those little ideas I had to do, I actually have time now. I don't have to go to work. I don't have to go to my 2 jobs. I'm not going to school if you're a student, right? All that stuff too. And they took advantage of that time to start taking control of that, maybe start like a side hustle. Yeah. And that's where, I mean, at least I know for me, like having been in business for myself before, I just looked at it as like, great. Now I can start doing 5 different things, throw them against the wall and see what sticks, you know? Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, that's the thing, because how much of our time in a day, if you're doing a typical, 8 to 4, 9 to 5, commuting in the morning, commuting at night, it's hard to get stuff done during a commute, unless you're riding public transportation. Even then, you're not going to get that much done. How many people it was like, holy smokes, look at all this extra time, whether it's fitness, if people were getting serious, of course, sucked. Equipment became expensive, but working out suddenly became easier in the mornings and the evenings because you're not having that commuting time. But then along with that is like, hey, now I've got a whole extra hour in the morning or a whole extra hour at night to just, like you're saying, throw stuff against the wall, see what sticks. And man, I mean, typically that's what most of us are looking for, right? As far as trying to build something new. I know anybody I've talked to, that was the biggest change was, hey, now I've suddenly got more time. And then if you're working from home, you're taking your lunch, you're just chilling in your same office. Oh yeah, I'm going to eat lunch and I'm going to work on this. I mean, you just got way more time to start actually playing around with it. And again, everybody is so used to online everything now because of COVID. Your options of things to do have also expanded. Yeah. And
no, it's what I really like about it was the fact that you could see people making shifts, and you can see things like a problem comes up, right? So if you adopt the mentality of like, how do I solve a problem, right? Yeah, to make a little bit of money, okay, at least to start with something like an idea. The gym thing, we have our garage gym. We've had that for a few years now. So when all the gyms shut down, we actually, my wife and I, got more people contacting us, going like, "Hey, is your gym open?" We're like, "Our garage." So we ended up. And it started with mostly hers because at that time she was the one that was training more full time, and I was working in a corporate job and just had a couple clients, and I was just getting back into training again. And what ended up happening was she basically just created this like spreadsheet, like a Google schedule, and we just created sign up slots for people, and then we maxed out like 6 people at a time because it's still a garage. But we had 3 racks and a lot of weight. And, And then people started contacting us going like, "Hey, are you selling any equipment?" And that's when I first started hearing about, because we already had all our equipment. We started hearing about like the equipment shortage. Yeah. Like, no. But I started looking like, I remember seeing a YouTube video one time on how to build squat racks and out of wood. Right. Looked up a few, did a bunch, and then I built one. And that was like my prototype, and it sold before I put it up for sale because somebody saw it on Facebook that I posted like, "Hey, just trying out this new project, And then I made another one, and then that one sold, and then it turned into a side business where like I bought tools. I started like a consulting business. I put everything under. Like I got my son and daughter involved. Like we were building, taking orders. I had like a whole system in play, and all it was just figuring out, I didn't know shit about like woodworking, right? Yeah, but I know how to use YouTube. Yep. Yeah. Same thing with this podcast, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And again, see the need, jump in there. And I think, I think that's the thing is too often we're either trying to copy somebody else and just try to duplicate something. And you're never going to be able to duplicate maybe not never, but for the most part, you're never gonna be able to duplicate some big name you see out there and do that. But look for the gap, look for where something's missing, and then jump into that spot. And you don't know how to do woodworking? Hey, thank God for YouTube. Yeah. Get in there and start building, and then boom. And I mean, I'd imagine like if you decided to make that a big time thing, you probably could have made a ton of money doing that. You could probably still be just killing it. And then, once the prices come back down, then you come up with, okay, what's our twist to make it, fancy, cool, stain, whatever to get that appeal to keep people coming even when gear comes down, which I don't feel like gear's even started to come down very much. I need some, but
I've looked at, so there's multiple people I know that also kind of went the similar route. One of them is in Grant Brogy, and he owns 2 starting strength gyms in California, and he's a Marine. And his whole thing was, how do we keep people training? So he turned his 2 gyms into manufacturing, where they started building the same thing, racks out of wood.
Yep.
And then they would deliver it. They rented out all their equipment they had in the gym to their clients. And then they would start building racks out of wood. Then they built benches. And then eventually, with his presence online and everything else too, he got a supplier, put it together. He started building his own racks out of steel.
Yep.
Right? Found a steel manufacturer. And now, dude, he's a gym owner, and he sells his own squat racks.
Yep.
His own weights, because he got a manufacturing place in Wisconsin that are American made, right?
Yep.
So he has plates, he's got squat racks, he's got benches, like it's all made. And it started. And then, of course, he stayed in business. He did well, made money. And then now his gyms are back open again, but he's still manufacturing squat racks. So he has a warehouse and the whole bit. Me and him were like, I was texting him back and forth. I'm like, hey, how are you doing your shipping and this and that and all this? So, and then other people did the same thing. They would make plans, sell them as an ebook for like $5 for squat rack, for everything, not just racks, like every gym equipment you could think of, right? How to make it at home. Like I started modifying them. I made pulleys. I used plumbing pipe to make a pulley setup. So a plate loaded pulley pipe.
That's awesome.
Cable crimping and all that other stuff too. I did. And then there was guys that started. One of them is called Sticks and Stones, where he started, because I started messing with it, but I didn't have the time because I was doing other stuff too with concrete. So he had a buddy who had who can make these silicone molds. So he made molds for 45 for plates. So one mold can make a 45, 35, and 25, and the other mold will make like the 10, 5s, and 2.5, just depending how much you filled it.
Right. And
then you would buy the kit of the mold, and then of course you could just make as many weights as you want, right? And then he just had fill lines, and he had instructions, and then like the type of chicken wire you use as a binder for the concrete, curing time, and all that. And he set up a whole YouTube video like how to. Dude, took off. That's all he does now. Yeah, he was going to school. He was working like a construction job. That's all he does now. He has his company now. That's it.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And then so he makes these molds, and then now that branched out into like dumbbell molds and kettlebell molds and all this stuff too. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. So, and I bet there were a lot of people that looked at it saying, oh, if you teach people how to make their own stuff, then what are they going to come back to you for? But not only is he's giving the knowledge away for free, but then he's making a product going like, hey, and if you want, I have this mold already preset, line set. I'll send you a little kit. Boom, boom, boom. Here's the YouTube link. And all you got to do is pay for the mold one time. And then it's just a matter of like how many times you want to make the weights. Yeah.
Yeah. And word of mouth for that is going to spread like wildfire. And so you're not as worried about people coming necessarily directly back to you to get more molds. I mean, obviously, if you like whatever you've used, then, hey, now I need a mold for this or a mold for that. I think what's interesting to go along with that question of what did you start a business? And if you did, what did you start? But with that is also how many people, if we asked, hey, did you think about it? But you didn't.
Yeah.
And why?
What?
Why didn't you?
I actually got a response. I got a response, right? Saying no, but I should have. And I responded back saying, well, not too late. You can still do it now. You know, I was just curious how many people. Now, to me, what do you think? I have my own 2 cents about this, right? But what do you think about, because you're in the Iron Council, so you're part of this online community, right? Where you can log into a Facebook page or like a chat room or like the calls you guys have. And of course, for different levels, you have different levels of actual, people invested time, energy, and all that stuff too, right? And then the Facebook group as a whole is kind of like the free-for-all clusterfuck, right? Especially when you get up to like 60, 70, 80,000 members, right?
It's pretty crazy.
But I was going on there a lot, especially after like I had started the woodworking stuff, and then I got back into training clients, and then clients were like, they were asking me to meal prep for them, and so I was doing and then I got into consulting. I went back into security, so I was jumping in these groups and chatting with people, and part of it was like just to keep connections, and then people would post about like lost my job, bills, like what do I do, and so many people would respond back, like whether it was in the Iron Council or from like the group itself, and a couple of the other ones I'm part of that. All of them were saying the same thing. Like, what's your skill set?
Yep. Okay.
Like, what do you do? What did you do for a living? Oh, I was a carpenter. I was in construction. Dude, you know how much money you can make? Like just being independent. There's places closed and that kind of, as long as you're not freaked out, manufacturing, like you just got to figure out a niche where you can leverage your skill set, right?
Right.
Start building and selling stuff. Like, do you know how to make a cabinet? Yeah. Okay. Do it. Do you know how to make gym? So I even started telling these guys like, hey, dude, here's a link, right? Build squat racks. Like they'll sell.
Yeah.
Well,
and I think it's interesting because, again, too often we're looking at someone or something and we're all set on like, for example, that Facebook page, we all want to be the next Ryan Mickler.
Yeah.
Guess what? He already made Order of Man. He already made the Iron Council. Good luck doing that again.
Sure.
Probably not going to happen.
Yeah.
So what is it that you're good at?
Yeah.
And how do you monetize that?
Right.
That is ultimately the question, because all of us, I think COVID really brought this out. Like, people realize I would rather be happy doing something that I love, that I'm passionate about, that I'm good at, and maybe not making as much money, and I'm feeling like I'm in control of my life. I'm in control of my destiny, essentially. Like, I'm not wondering what's going to happen tomorrow and completely shut down my work. Right. And so to step back and go, what do I enjoy doing? What am I good at? And how can I monetize that? I think that's a really powerful question, because then you can start getting practical about, well, okay, I'm, like you said, I'm a great carpenter. Hey, there's a lot of guys that are good carpenters. There's a million ways you could go with that.
Yep.
And then you start looking at things like, whether it's coaching skills, consulting skills, you start getting into some of those finer things. Like, there's a lot of different directions you could go into. What people group do you enjoy working with? Hey, I want to work with veterans doing this, but pick that thing, do that, find a way to make that successful, because you're going to stick with that. You're going to be more likely to continue through. But I think too often we're held back by some kind of fear. And the reality is, so we were just talking in the Iron Council last month, our topic was courage. And we read a great book, Courage is Calling. And I should know the author off the top of my head, but I don't. Courage is Calling. That's good book. But the reality is, we talked about courage and fear. And the reality is, so many of us are held by fear. And when you step back and look at fear doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Fear has to do with something in the future that hasn't even happened yet.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is, this thing that hasn't happened yet, that is not even a guarantee of happening, is stopping you from being successful, stopping you from doing what you really want to do. When you kind of break it down like that, that's crazy. And so I think you simplify it. It's like, oh, geez, how am I letting myself get held back? And again, so a lot of people are still working remote. A lot of people are still kind of in the after effects of COVID. What can you start doing now to move past that fear? And so that's the other question. It's like, no, I should have, but I didn't. Well, why? Why didn't you? What is holding you back from doing it? Because I think that's an important question for all of us to ask ourselves, is like, what is holding me back? Because identify that thing. And then, a lot of it's probably laziness, but a lot of it is fear of stepping out of our comfort zone. For me in particular, over the years, I've had a lot of rumblings in my head of things I wanted to do. And it was, I don't want to either step out into this thing and then suddenly I'm not able to provide for my family. And so that makes me a bad, husband, father, provider, or it just makes me uncomfortable because I don't really know how this is going to go. I'm not getting that regular check doing this thing I've been doing for years. I mean, I was an arborist for pretty much my entire adult life.
Right.
It was easy. It's comfortable. I know what I'm doing there. I could stay in that, but it wasn't fulfilling. And ultimately I was never able to be totally sovereign unless I wanted to step out and start my own business, which is a whole nother can of worms when it comes to tree work. And so, what is that thing? Identifying that thing. What is that thing that did stop me from doing it?
Yeah.
And then actually digging into that. I mean, that's huge.
Yeah. No, I think it's really big. I think it's that was kind of what I was getting to, which is, what do you think has stopped people from doing that? And I think a big part of that is fear. I think another part of it is there's a lot of people that don't know where to start. And then what happens is they look at the idea of what they want to do, and they don't have an actionable plan on how to actually get there. So then they get caught up. And I was actually just talking to a buddy of mine at church the other day, and this isn't a knock. This is a totally normal thing a lot of people do when they already have a career. They have a family, you have wife, kids, on the other end if you're married, and they think about like the perfect scenario of something they want to do, whether it's like getting into like music or getting into a different business altogether that involves some type of manufacturing, like whatever it is. And they think about, okay, I want to be a writer. Like, okay, well, I need a writing room. I need to get away from my kids. I need to do this and do that. And then, so it becomes this thing of like, well, I got to wait for the perfect scenario, like the right time. Right. And then what ends up happening, and so this is what he was telling me, was he goes, I get this whole thing because he used to do this work, musician. He was a musician for a while and he toured for a little bit, and he would basically say like, unless I have my studio built out, and he does construction now, right? And unless I have my studio built out separate from my house where my kids aren't going to be around this night, he won't even sit down and just play the guitar, right?
Oh wow.
Yeah, like it's just not so he knows, and he already told me, he goes, I think I'm at a point where I make it so big to get to this like perfect spot to start, right? Like, and that doesn't exist really, right?
No,
because even like right now, dude, like I have, like before we started, I got my own studio space, right? Got the equipment and everything else too, and it's just a little bit unorganized today, right? And it put me back about a half hour for setting up and that kind of stuff. Nothing's ever perfect, especially when you have a family, kids, you're working from home and that kind of thing too. But the timing thing, people use that timing thing, like I don't have time as an excuse, right? You can. And I'm only saying this just as an example of like, because I can only speak from personal experience, right? Okay. So today's Tuesday. All right. I got up, went to the gym, like we're at SBG, got my workout in. Okay. Then I ran a strength class at 9:00. Went with my wife at this, not a usual, but we had a church service, like a midweek service, because we had some, people in from out of town. Okay. Did that, came home, right? Changed, went to SBG with my wife. Me and her went and had a jiu-jitsu class. Okay. Spent about a half hour doing some open to mat. Came back here. Me and you sitting down to do a podcast. After this, I'm going to take the kids to jiu-jitsu and then come back. And then, I'm going to sit down and do some work, with like the other business I have. And so it's just a matter of like scheduling your day out to an extent to where, and even that is like, it's a lot, but at the same time, it actually went pretty smooth till I got home going, shit, because I did this one thing different this morning. I forgot to make this adjustment. So then I ended up like being behind a little bit. But it doesn't mean you just trash the whole thing saying like, I'm not doing anything anymore. Right. Like I'm done. Like this isn't perfect. Yeah. No, that's crap. You just learn to move forward. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think the first step in that, there's two things as you were talking, I was thinking about. Number one, if you don't think you have time.
Yeah.
And Ryan Murray, one of the guys in my battle team, super simple. Love this. He just made a little box.
Yeah.
Draw a little diagram on a piece of paper every hour in the day. What are you doing with your time? And start tracking your time every day.
Yeah.
Guess what? You have a lot of time. Your priorities are probably screwed up.
Yep.
Myself included. If I sit there and I start doing that, I'm like, geez, I am wasting so much time doing stupid things, whether it's scrolling Instagram. If you really actually start tracking all of your time, it's currency. It's like money. If you want to really improve your finances, what do? You start by tracking what's going out.
Right.
Same with your time. Track your time. Guess what? You're probably not prioritizing enough and being intentional enough with the amount of time.
That's the big one.
And then the second thing I think is most of us don't have a vision. I think, and we talk about this a lot in the Iron Council. If you don't have a clear, specific vision, you got nothing.
Yeah, you're just reacting.
Yeah, you're just reacting. And, the Bible says, where there is no vision, the people perish. It's true. You just flounder and you fall apart. Like if you don't have a clear vision, because until you have that vision, once you have a clear, concise vision of, let's say 15, 20 years, 15, 20 years from now, my dream is to be doing fill in the blank.
Right.
Now I can start working backwards and say, well, that seems almost unrealistic. I mean, honestly, the vision that I have written out, some of it's kind of ridiculous. You could look at it and be like, who knows when I'll get that? But the reality is, now I can backtrack and say, okay, well, if this is my vision,
how do I get there?
What is one thing I can do every day that starts moving the needle towards that?
Right.
And then you start breaking it down into little, and that's one of the reasons I love the battle plan idea from Ryan Mickler, because that's what you're doing is you have 4 quadrants in your life and you're saying, okay, for 90 days, I'm going to do this little thing and move the needle. And guess what? We can do that. And what you're doing is you're building habits. And instead of pivoting, now you've built that habit. And so now you're just layering quarter by quarter, you're layering more habits on top of there. And suddenly, like from my own experience, 2 years ago to now, I look at the things that are habits now. I'm like, man, I always said these things. I didn't have time to do them.
Yeah.
Guess what?
Yeah.
I'm doing that and more now because I just said, hey, here's my vision. I need to move the needle. So I'm going to start baby step, baby step, baby step. And so if you don't have a vision of what you want, of course, you're not going to know where to start. And then if you get that vision, then I think the other piece, and we've talked about this like every show so far, men around you, like, I don't know where to start. Well, I guarantee you know somebody who does know where to start. And if you don't know anyone, you can go find them.
Jump into it,
you know, like you have been huge. We have had so many conversations about different things I'm going through right now. I know guys in the Iron Council. There's so many guys where I can be like, hey man, I have no clue, you know, how to do this part of being an LLC or this thing here or this thing here. Go ask, and they'll help you. But again,
seek out the information.
Exactly, and again, the digital age, like everything's out there. But again, if you don't have that vision that's driving you, that fear is going to overcome any kind of semblance of a vision you do have, and then it's kind of like, well, that's a lot of work, and then we just kind of sit there, and then next thing you know, you're 45 going, well, it's too late now.
See, and if that's the problem you have as well, which is the like the defeatist mentality, well, now you're talking about something different. That's an internal thing you got to work on. You know, it's not a matter of opportunity. That's a whole other animal that's super destructive, right? For yourself, and then of course for, you know, if you're married, if you have a family, if you have people around you that rely on you, you know, in any facet, right? Then you're bound to constantly just disappoint and come up short, right? And that aspect you said about seeking out information, that's where those you know, being part of those groups really help from a standpoint of just being able to ask questions and seek out advice. You know, talk to people that have different backgrounds. Just like, it makes such a huge difference, man. The one thing also, I think people that come from a background of like a corporate environment or an office job or shift work where they're in a specific place for anywhere from 8 to 14 hours a day, I think what happens is if they've done it long enough, they think that for me to go start another business, I have to apply 14 hours a day to that. You don't. You just pick a dedicated time to build on every single day. And then you have to be disciplined enough to, while you're doing this gig, right? This job that you have or career that you have, okay, well, how much time are you going to apply every day? It doesn't need to be an immense amount, but where it's going to be like a valuable amount of time to actually move the needle forward to where you want to get to, right? It's kind of like the thing of the super simple adage of like saving money, like just any dollar you get, take 10% and move it into a separate account. Like that's like a basic concept, right? Okay, just take 10%. And people don't do it because they think like, well, that doesn't make a difference. If I get $300 from this job I do, well, I'm only putting $30 away. Yeah, but if you never did it and you work in gig work, right? And you get $50, $100, $300, $500, $200 here, it adds up, especially if you put it in an account where you're never going to touch. But if you don't do it at all, well, of course you're not going to see anything, and then you're going to be defeated and go like, it doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
I think another aspect of it is people that have and it's not across the board, but like I see this as well. Most people that have this like resiliency that they built up in themselves also tend to do things in their lives that require like incremental growth, like whether it's like training, fitness training, strength training, CrossFit, military, jiu-jitsu, you know, anything like that, where you can't just walk in and be like, boom, I want to do this, and now I'm a black belt. You know, boom, I want to be shredded. Boom, I want to, you know, win a powerlifting competition. Right? Or I want to go do a sport. Like, you're not going to roll out of bed tomorrow and go do a Spartan race unless you're kind of a freak athlete. But you can put a plan together and then do the training and then get to it. So people that do that, I've seen similarities in those types of people that have kind of like persevered and succeeded and excelled in this environment over the last couple of years.
Yeah. And again, that kind of comes from ultimately a big picture, kind of a vision of, you know, you're not just kind of zoned in on this one little area, getting caught up in whatever's going on immediately. You're able to say, okay, I recognize that if I start doing this little thing every day, 10 years from now, I might be a black belt. You know, those kinds of things, being able to see, okay, I can recognize the tactics, daily tactics that I can strategically put in place to get me to where I want to be, rather than like, everybody wants to get rich now. You know, I'm going to start this thing and, you know, have 1 million followers on Instagram tomorrow. Like, no, nothing works like that. And so being willing to have the endurance of actually stepping it out baby step by baby step. Like you're saying, it's all those little things, little incremental growth that's going to get you there. And yeah, I think part of it's probably our culture at this point as well. Yeah. Like we just have this idea that things should come quickly, things should be easy. Certainly with younger people, there's a sense of like, well, it should just be given to me. And I'm kind of right on the cusp of that generation. And it's just, you got to work for it. And are you willing to work for it? And then, coming up with a plan.
Yeah. Another one of the answers I got was doubling down on his business. Mm-hmm. So when everything hit, and he's in like insurance and finance, right? So like personal finance management, that kind of stuff too. So what he did was he just shifted a little bit his business to where he relied on certain aspects of his business, and saw like where things were shutting down and where things were going to dry up and people were going to start cutting. And then what he did was he doubled down on various areas that he saw like growth happening in that area, with like, like online businesses. And then he looked at, okay, so where can I look at providing services that there's not really like a robust field in, right? So like independent contractors, self-employed people, all that stuff too. So he actually built out an aspect of his business. So he already had the infrastructure. Right. He just kind of shifted and was like, okay, I'm going to focus here as well and go after this demographic where, there's not really like a hard line of where to address that as well too. Right. So sometimes it's just a matter of just like knowing how to pivot and shift and redirect your energy to see kind of the problems that are coming. And
that's a great point.
Yeah. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel is really what I'm saying.
Right. And that flexibility, I think, especially with an entrepreneurial mindset, if that's what you're looking to do, you have to be able to pivot, because the reality is nothing is going to be exactly what you think it's going to be. Or you may think, okay, I kind of feel like, I think that's another thing. A lot of people don't end up pursuing, you were saying that people don't pursue it because, they don't know where to start, but then also maybe they start and it's like, well, it's just not going the way I thought. Like, hey, just step out there and start. And maybe what you realize when you start, when you actually get out in it, is, okay, this specific, target audience, whatever, isn't quite what's going to get me here. But hey, I'm now recognizing, because I've taken the action to get out here doing this, I can now pivot. Well, you never would have known that if you didn't step out on some level, And so I think that's the thing, is some people are like waiting again for that perfect environment of like, it's like, when people talk about having kids, like, I want everything to be perfect before I have kids. I'm always like, you will never be perfectly ready to have kids.
Define that. What does perfect mean?
Right? What does perfect mean? Yeah. I always said this already. Someday, a
real place.
And so often the best things happen when we're just out there making strides. Maybe it's not going super well, but it isn't until you're out there making those strides that doors start opening, and then boom, next thing you know, you're in this super sweet spot and you're killing it. But again, if you don't take the action to get out there, you'd never have made that realization and been able to pivot. And so being flexible, I feel like even just finding your purpose in general.
Yeah.
Like, I wish that you could just be like, what is my purpose in life? Light shines from heaven. God says, hey, here's what I want you to do.
Yeah.
No, not very often. And so what do? You start following things, you start stepping out there. And once you're in that, taking strides, that's suddenly where doors start opening. You start making connections, you start networking. Right. And I'm sure you could say that from your experience. You've been doing this a lot longer than me as far as kind of running your own business. If you wouldn't have gotten out there, put yourself out there, you wouldn't have half the connections you have. You wouldn't have been able to kind of get to a place where now you're sitting in a position where you're like, hey, I'm really digging what I'm doing right now. Yeah. I'm feeling comfortable. This is right up my alley and I'm doing well.
I want to lean into this. I want to focus on this aspect. And that's the next part of it, which is like the last part. You have to be willing to like pursue networking. And what I mean by that is, I don't mean everybody you meet, you're trying to sell something to. Everybody you meet, you're trying to get money out of. What I mean is, like, you have to be willing to look at investing time into people and relationships and like making relationships, like in building, because you never know, you absolutely never know where, like, nothing's going to happen sitting on your butt at home and shutting yourself off from the world, right? Like nothing's going to happen at all. It's kind of like that thing, like every question you don't answer is always you don't ask is always going to be a no, right?
Right.
Like, yeah. So you got to, at least if you ask, there's a 50-50 shot, right? So if your whole mentality on talking to, like, it's just something as simple as like having a conversation with like a stranger or an acquaintance and kind of fleshing out, getting to know them and maybe seeing like, hey, this is a relationship I want to invest some time in and build and see where it goes, then you would never even have the opportunities that you want, right? Yeah. It's like there's so many business opportunities that came my way and like people I know because they went to choose to do things. I mean, something as simple as like joining a gym, joining jiu-jitsu, jumping into a group like the Iron Council where like you invest some time and money and you're seeking out some like-minded people. And we talked about this last time too as well, but you can go as well. I mean, you can do all that. But if you just go, show up and take off and you don't take the time to actually build out some relationships.
Right.
Okay. Well, you're just the weird guy that comes and sits in the corner, right? You know? And of course it's like anything else, right? You're going to get out what you put into it.
Yep.
So like you have to be willing more than anything else. Like, yes, of course, start. But if anything you do relies on, or you want to have more opportunities with things, well, you need to create those opportunities.
Yes.
And those opportunities a lot of times will come from relationships that you build and you cultivate. And I don't mean go suck up to everybody and go try to be everybody's best friend. No. It's you see things out, you have conversations. If somebody invites you out to something, hey, maybe take them up on it. Maybe invite them over, go get coffee, like all these different things. Like you never know where something might lead and an opportunity might arise. And half the time, like when you go and do some of these social things or, people at work or the gym or whatever it is, you have no idea what they actually do on a day-to-day basis and what they have access to and what they might be looking for exactly what you're offering.
Exactly.
And they just don't even know. They never thought about asking anybody at their gym, or number two, they never, sometimes people don't even realize they need it until like it comes up in a conversation. Like today it happened, for example, I'm at the gym, I'm talking, to my class and like one of them, half of them own their own businesses. And one of them was talking about how just her and her husband run their own thing and it's all of them. And it's exhausting. And I talked to them about this new virtual assistant service I'm using. And we got talking a little about it. And then later on in the day, I got a text from another client who was there. She has her own business. And she's like, that's exactly what I need. I don't want to hire a full-time employee right now, but I need a service like that. Boom. You know what I mean? Yeah. Yep. So you never know like how just having a conversation is going to make a connection, so
I think that's huge. Yeah. Just networking. And again, the typical thing we find these days is people are feeling alone. They're feeling isolated. Right. They're feeling all these things and like, oh, I don't know what to do. Networking and talking to people, getting out there and specifically with men, it's like, hey, go put yourself around other good, like-minded men. All of a sudden, all kinds of doors start opening. Yeah. And, it is a heck of a lot easier to try something or meet a person and try doing something with them and then say, you know what? Nah, this isn't it. Yeah. Then to look back and say, gosh, that opportunity's gone now. And I wish I would have tried it. Like most of us live in this place of like, I wish I would have given that a shot. Wish I would have given that a shot. I would far rather be like, nah, this isn't it. Yeah. And be able to pivot than constantly be looking back, wishing I would have taken up on opportunities. But you got to put yourself in a position for those opportunities to pop up. Yeah. And so, I mean, that's something that's been kind of fun about moving to a new area. Yeah. Is I'm meeting all new people, whether it's through the gym, through church, through, school stuff for the kids. And I'm meeting all kinds of new people. And it's been a long time since I've been in like a whole new environment of networking. You get into a routine where it's like go to work, come home, kids, go to sleep, go to work, come home. You know everybody and you kind of whatever. And so it's been pretty fun actually to build network. And it is I enjoy crazy the opportunities that have popped up just from having random conversations and exchanging business cards.
Me and you sitting down here doing this podcast. Right? Yeah. That like I didn't know you 6 months ago. Yeah.
So it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, it is. And again, if we were, if either one of us were, reserved, and I'm not saying anything wrong with that, but I mean, if we chose not to, like we talked about, like when you first came on, right? Like the first episode we did, we were just kind of going over like your background and how, you and I met. And, my wife meets people. Like whatever, right? But she brought up like, meeting your wife at that SBG, women's camp and everything else too. And she, gave me her information. Like she gave me the Instagram information, and I was like, oh, cool. You know what? And it sounded like they hit it off. So then I shot you a message on Instagram.
Yep.
Hey man, sounds like, it's just like, now, how many times does that happen where like your wife, like your spouse or a friend says like, I met this person. It happened to be on this, mutual interest thing that we were doing together. Right. This is their family, all these different things. And you go, oh, that's cool. And then you don't do anything with that. Like you don't pursue maybe like, oh, that might be a nice, like family to get to know. That might be an interesting person to get to know, and you don't actually pursue, maybe see, where that's going to go. Like,
right.
So
and sometimes that's a comfort zone thing too.
It is.
It really is. Like it's sometimes we get so stuck in our comfort zone. That's like, well, I gotta go meet some new person. I always laugh when it comes to like finding mentors as men.
Yeah.
It's like the little kid in the schoolyard, like asking a girl out on to the dance. It's like, oh shucks, hey man, we feel weird approaching another guy and be like, hey man, I would like to meet, let's get coffee and let's talk about this.
Sure.
But stepping out of your comfort zone and doing that, man, it's crazy the opportunities that can pop up. And again, what's the worst thing that could happen?
Right.
You go have coffee, you talk to somebody, and that's that.
Yeah.
Big deal.
Yeah. When we moved here, after I started getting into CAP class and going a little bit, I remember after I met Andy, after a few classes, I was getting to a point where like a couple people had talked to me about, doing potential sponsorships. And I was like, I don't know shit about sponsorships. I was like, oh, got a successful podcast host here. Let me go ask him, and there was never a thing as far as like, oh, I can't ask him,
right.
Like this weird. No, I just said, hey man, you want to ask you a question about sponsorship options for podcasts? Like I have this little podcast, and this, like, yeah, dude, of course, anytime. And like, right. Okay. Now, Worski, what if you said no? Like, oh, I don't have time. Okay. Big deal.
Yeah.
Okay. But so it's like you create this like narrative in your head. And I think this would be actually a cool topic next time is you create this narrative in your head. And then I think a lot of couples do this. And then they avoid conversations, and then that leads to like 10x the problem that would have happened. Yes. And it's like the conversation, the subject that you avoided wasn't the issue, but you lying or avoiding having the conversation made it like 10x worse, right?
Yeah.
And that happens in like relationships, that happens in business, that happens like all across the board. It's not just marriage, right? Like that happens all the time, right? Yeah. So.
Yeah, because we've got this imaginary idea of how this is going to happen, how it's going to go down once we have that conversation.
Right.
I think that's really common in marriages. I think that's a great point. So often it's like, oh, well, I know here's how it's going to go. I'm going to go talk to her. She's going to get mad or she's going to do this. So why even bother? And then the reality is you just made everything a million times worse because now finally it's a blow up 3 months later and you're trying to recover from it. Yeah. Like we've got all these perceptions in our head. Nah, just step out there and do it.
Yeah.
And yeah. Usually, now marriage, there's a little bit different consequences.
A little different than business. Yeah.
But usually, like, what's the worst that could happen?
Right.
It
makes sense, dude. 100%.
Yeah.
All right. Coming up on an hour here, I want to wrap this up. I wanted to, on the next one, kind of noodle on this a little bit, right? I wanted to start looking at, got a lot of, now that we've been here a little while, there's a lot of really cool, like, business owners here. A lot of really cool business owners here. So I've talked to a few and started having, so if you're listening, you're here local in Montana, and my little Phoebe came in. Hi, Phoebe. Hi. Yeah, go ahead. Okay, that one I will leave in. That
that's cute enough. You can leave it in.
There's no lecture. So for those of you who had a chance to listen, like within the first hour and a half of the last episode release, I have this new virtual assistant company. Like they're doing editing and whatnot. And when me and David were recording last time, my 11-year-old who never walks in on my podcast, like ever, like she's like 2 years, she's never done it. Out of the blue, just like, your wife was here, she just decides to walk in. Hey, how's it going? Like, what are you doing? And I'm like lecturing her on air.
Yep.
And then like 5 minutes after I released the episode, you text me like, hey, do you mean to leave that in? I was like, son of a bitch.
I'm glad I listened to it earlier.
Yeah, no, it was good.
Just happened to be listening to it. Yeah.
But anyway, I want to, I think now that we're kind of getting in a groove here, I want to start looking at getting some business owners on. There's a lot of really cool small business owners here in the Valley, and a few have already expressed interest in like coming over here and coming on. So we would just need some more heaters.
Yeah, it's cold.
It's freaking cold in here.
It wasn't bad at first,
No.
and then now after sitting for a while,
stop
I'm
moving.
like,
You're like, whoo. Yeah, for those of you who don't know, like again, I record this in my garage, and it's only half insulated, and it's a brisk 19 outside here in Montana. So yeah, we're gonna
winter has arrived.
I'm gonna have to invest in something here soon. So
yeah.
all right, man. Thanks, man. Until next time.